Hey YouTube, Kira Qualia here, bringing you all my future card Buddyfight Katana World Skull Warriors deck profile for May 2021. Big thanks to my buddy Jim for letting me borrow his Skull Warriors deck for this deck profile. I want to at least, give one final deck profile to all of the many different decks we have in future card Buddyfight. Kind of like the final play for the deck since the, series is ending and we won't have any more support. So this will basically be like the final, update to the deck with all the new support from Buddy Ragnarok, including the Revival Buddy for Yamagitsune. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the deck of choice, and also the buddy of choice, I'm using Magatsu Flame Yamagitsune for Katana World, having the playstyle of the Skull Warriors, which is basically destroying themselves, gaining benefits from their destruction, whether it be draw or just additional units onto the field. You run a good number of different Yamagitsune being size 1 monsters. They have that benefit of being able to call multiples onto the field, and then just having that benefit of all the different attacks they can do against your opponent, and then to destruction as well. For our main numbers of Yamagitsune, I am running 4, since it is our buddy of choice, Magatsu Flame Yamagitsune. With this card, you basically call cost, put a Skull Warrior from your drop zone into its soul, and pay 1 gauge. If a Skull Warrior on your field attacks and deals damage to your opponent, you may destroy that card. If you do, drop 1 of your opponent's gauge, deal 1 damage to your opponent, and your opponent chooses and drops a hand card. So basically dwindling away your opponent's resources when it Skull Warrior attacks and deals damage. So you always want to have Magatsu Flame set up on your field to be able to benefit from this play. Having 4 of this means you can also run multiples of this card, and also with double attack means it's a definite scary play against your opponent, being able to dwindle away resources just with this card alone being a Skull Warrior. I also run 4 of the Humanoid Beast Yaijeko with this one. Pale Fire Circle. If you have a Skull Warrior on your field, put a spell from the field into the drop zone. If you do call this card from your drop zone, you may only use Pale Fire Circle once per turn. And when this card enters the field, destroy another Skull Warrior on your field to gain 1 life and draw a card. So it's draw power, but also with this setup, you put a spell from the field into the drop zone, giving you more resources, but also setting up the play of when this card is destroyed for the main destruction play with all of your different Skull Warriors on the field all together. And I also run 4 of the Evil Ocular Arts Yamagitsune. Once again, like I said, there's a big focus on a good number of the many different Yamagitsune in the deck. With Ocular Arts Dead Tracks, when this card enters the field, call up to 1 size 1 or less monster from your drop zone by paying its call costs, and you can only use this ability once per turn. So when you call this card, any of the other different cards in the drop zone for the call of size 1 or less monster, which are the majority of all we run in the deck, can easily be called onto the field and made use of with this card. And with its call cost just being a pay 1 life, you can save up the gauge costs for this card and all the other ones you may call on in the field, with one of the big ones being our next card, and that is the Revival Buddy for Yamagitsune, which is Evil in Heart Yamagitsune Revival Buddy. I thought of making this the buddy in the deck. If you want to do so, there's really no big difference between Magatsu Flame Yamagitsune and Yamagitsune Revival Buddy. The biggest thing, though, is this card does have a pretty big gauge cost. With pay 2 gauge, then put 2 cards from your drop zone into its soul. So more of a defensive card, especially for being a size 1. All Skull Warrior on your field can attack your opponent, even if they have a monster in their center. So basically giving all of them Shadow Dive. And damage of Skull Warriors on your field cannot be reduced if attacking alone. And a Dark, basically with its final skill, 2 Darkness. When your Skull Warrior deals damage to your opponent, you may destroy that card. If you put the top card of your deck in your gauge, gain a life and draw a card. Once again, more resources, just like Magatsu Flame, taking away your opponent's resources, and then Yamagitsune Revival Buddy giving you resources. But once again, it's player preference on which one you want to be your preferred buddy in the deck. I just have Magatsu Flame as the one of choice, but Yamagitsune Evil in Heart can also be another added option. For some of the other monsters in the deck, another great one just for pressure against your opponent is Shutting Out the World, Yorinezume. All Skull Warrior on your field get critical +1. So with the multiple attacks you do with the Skull Warrior, and the fact that your Evil in Heart Yamagitsune can make them all attack if your opponent has a monster in the center, is definitely scary. And when this card enters the field, if you have another Skull Warrior on your field, put the top 2 cards of your deck in your gauge. So with this card having no call cost, and the fact that you need to pay 2 gauge for Evil in Heart Yamagitsune, it's a perfect combo, especially for that easy setup, and then just being able to call out another monster onto the field with plenty of the other cards just being a pay 1 life, or even just no call cost at all. You'll be able to rely on this card for the gauge setup to call out your Evil in Heart Yamagitsune, or even multiples of this card onto the field. For some of the other numbers in the deck, for some of the lower numbers, I also run 3 Premature Passing Bibi Kazawa. When this card enters the field from hand, put the total of 2 Skull Warrior or Water Monsters from your deck or drop zone and shuffle your deck, basically. With this card, it's recycle for all the different Skull Warriors. If you run out of numbers from your drop zone, being able to add them up to the bottom of the deck is a big plus there. And this card cannot be nullified when attacking alone. So the critical boost you can provide with your Yamizumi, and this card could potentially be the game-winning attack against your opponent. Since the attack cannot be nullified, you'll basically have to have your opponent just rely on nullifying the damage that they would take from this card. But also great, like I said, pressure when you have your Yoronozumi on the field for that setup. And then for some of the other lower number monster counts, I also run 1 Undying Ben Shoujo and 1 Godly Speed Natsubame. With both of these being more setup when this card enters the field from the drop zone. If you have a Skull Warrior on your field, you draw a card, and at the end of the turn, destroy this card. So just being able to multiply call back Natsubame onto the field for the draw power is why I'm only running 1 of this card, because it'll destroy at the end phase anyway, and then you can just call back again. And with your Ben Shoujo, if this card's in your drop zone, you may pay 1 gauge. If you do, call this card to the drop zone at the end of the turn, destroy this card. So setting both of these cards up in the drop zone means that that's all really you need for the numbers, because then you just call it out for the gauge cost, or when it is called out, you get that draw power, and it being a once per turn, and then they'll both be destroyed at the end of the turn anyway. And then as for the item of choice, I'm only running 2 Hairpin Blade Hozuki. You pay 1 gauge and 1 life. This card can attack even if you have a monster in the center. And when a monster enters your field from the drop zone, draw a card. So it only activates once per turn, but you're going to do that plenty with this Skull Warrior deck, being able to draw over and over again with all the cards that can be called out from the drop zone onto the field. So being able to rely on Hairpin for draw power is a big plus there for sure. And also just for the fact that you have that setup is a big plus as well, because you rely on your Yamagitsune for calling back out to the field, along with some of our other spells. And that's it for the monsters and the item. Moving on now to our spells that we run in the deck. I run 4 Demon Way Arachio. With this card, you may cast this only if 2 more Skull Warriors on your field were destroyed this turn. You pay 1 gauge to draw 3 cards. You can only cast Demon Way Arakuyo once per turn. The draw 3 cards, and the fact that you don't minus any more after that, and the fact that most of your Skull Warriors will be destroyed by their own card abilities is a definite for just paying 1 gauge for a draw 3, and the fact that it is a counter means that you can activate this at any time, even during your basically opponent's turn, if 2 or more Skull Warriors were destroyed during that turn for a draw 3. So you don't even have to rely on your Skull Warriors. You can just have 1 of your other Skull Warriors on the field be destroyed by your opponent and still get that destruction draw. I also run 2 Demon Way Jugeneressa. With this one, put the top card of your deck in your gauge. Then if you have 2 or more Skull Warrior in your field, draw a card. If you have 3 or more, you gain 1 life. It's just gauge, draw, and then more setup for all of it. So very, very useful for the draw power and life gain. Only running 2. If you wanted to run potentially 4, I can show you what other spells to take out in just a bit, with some of the other numbers being 2 Art of Explosive Hades Fall, being more of a card that stops your opponent with their monster calling. But if you wanted to run 4 copies of Demon Way Jugeneressa, you can take out these 2 cards and add in 4 copies of this in total for player preference at that point, or even if you have the resource to use with this card. It just helps to thin out the deck and give you more and more cards to draw into. And I also potentially do want to run 4 Banquet of the Unrighteousness. It's just more setup in the drop zone. I have another Art of Explosive Hades Fall in here for more of the fill-in for it. But being able to just set up, you look at 3 cards on the top of your deck, put 1 monster from among them in your hand and drop the rest, can search out a good majority of maybe the specific Skull Warriors you need for your play. So for this, and the fact that it doesn't take up any of your gauge costs is another big help for this also. It's just a once per turn, but you definitely want to see it early as you can, so running 4 of it just betters those chances. And for some of the bigger numbers for these spells, I also run 4 Art of Body Replacement, just a good way to protect yourself from penetrate attacks. You can only cast this if you're being attacked in your opponent's turn. You counter it and nullify if it's not a link attack, but you still have a monster on the center, which is good, like I said, going around the different penetrate attacks your opponent may try on you. And also just stopping the attack in total is for Ninja Art Snake Gaze. For just paying 1 life, you rest a monster in your opponent's field, and it's not a once per turn either, so opening up multiples of this card in your hand. As long as you have the life to pay, you can rest multiple cards on your opponent's field. With the last cards for the one-ofs in the deck, I run 1 Demon Way Jikukezu. You call a Skull Warrior or Executioner monster from your drop zone by paying its call cost. You may only cast it once per turn. At the beginning of your main phase of this card's in your drop zone, you may pay 2 gauge to put this card from your drop zone into your hand. So if you have the gauge to use, like I said, you don't use it for much except for the Revival Buddy. Being able to recycle this card is a big help there, or even just potentially setting it up in the drop zone with some of our other cards for us to reuse or re-add back to our hand. And also more setup is 1 Demon Way Kishiguri. With this card, if you have 10 or more in your drop zone, you draw a card. By putting the top 2 cards of your deck into the drop zone to draw a card initially, it's a true draw card. So late game especially, this card comes in handy. And lastly, 1 Demon Way Sakura Fubuki. For paying 2 life, you nullify a spell cast by your opponent. It's at 1, that's why we're only running 1 of it, but still a great card to use just to stop any of your opponent's potential plays when you open this card up. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Like I said, I still enjoy updating the different future card Buddy Fight decks and at least giving like a final update to a good number of them. I haven't even done a deck profile for Skull Warriors on the channel before, but I definitely felt it needed one just to have a final send-off for all the different support we received for it. And until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Qualia out.